This is just one of the websites that I use. And it provides a simulation of the cell membrane. It's from PBS Learning, and it's called Cell Membrane Just Passing Through. So you can do a quick Google search and you should be able to pull it up. One key thing, it will not come up in Google Chrome. You have to use IE in order for it to work. I don't know why. It used to work in Google Chrome, but now it's not working in Google Chrome anymore. So you have to use Internet Explorer for this for some reason. I've tried numerous laptops, and it's just not working. So anyway, this is what the cell membrane looks like. And I'm just going to go over what I go through at my class when I first show them this model and how we work back into the lesson. So this is the cell's membrane. How do I know? Number one, it has the phospholipid bilayer. You see two layers of the phospholipids. And it also has these really large proteins lodged in the middle of the bilayer. So that's one indication that this is a cell's membrane. It's still a lot more complex than this, but these are the main components of the cell's membrane. One thing you'll notice is that the phospholipids, the little tails on them are moving. So if you're looking at it, it has like a little head part. Some people like to call these legs, but they're tails. You'll notice that they're actually moving. So they do have a fluid motion that they have. And again, this helps to move things in and out of the cell, or it helps with the control of moving stuff in and out of the cell. So anyway, what we first do, or what I like to do when I'm starting this, I like to review again the function of the cell membrane, and that's to let stuff in and out of the cell. So oxygen is something that we need for survival. We have to inhale oxygen. So you'll notice that the oxygen moves inside of the cell. Carbon dioxide we exhale out of our mouth, so you'll notice that that goes out of the cell. Glucose. Glucose is sugar, of course, and most sugars end in OSC. That's something that we need for survival. So we need to take that inside of our cells. And what you'll notice, oxygen went in and it went through the phospholipids, but glucose went in and it went through the proteins. Reason being, oxygen is small, and anything that's small, it can just squeeze through the phospholipids. Carbon dioxide, also small, it can go through the phospholipids. But glucose, in comparison to the cell, glucose is really large. If we're talking about a molecule of glucose, it's really large in comparison to the cell. So large things, again, they have to take that protein to go in or out of the cell. Potassium, and you'll notice that they do have this color coordinated. So potassium is going to travel through the orange, and that's going inside of the cell. So I know that potassium is large. Sodium, also large because it's using a protein and not the phospholipids. Now, what you should notice though with everything, even if it starts on the outside or if it starts on the inside, it still has to cross the cell's membrane to go either in or out. So the cell membrane is what separates the cell from its environment. So oxygen, again, has to cross the cell membrane to get in. Carbon dioxide has to cross the cell membrane to get out. So just a little quick review. Oxygen is small because it's going through the phospholipid. Carbon dioxide also small. Glucose, large because it's going through the protein. Potassium, also large because it's going through the protein. Now water, I want you to make a decision about water. Again. Now, my students always say both, and it's not both. It's either small or large. And what you would want to notice is that water, since it is squeezing through the phospholipids, it's really, really small. And again, it's just small enough that it's able to pass through there. Why it's using a protein, you got to think about if proteins let large things across, then it can let a large amount of water in because water is small, and we have to be able to take in a lot of water in order for survival. So these are special proteins called aquaporins, again, aqua for water, to let water inside of the cell. This enzyme, I want you to determine if that is small or large. And enzymes, again, they are proteins. My students know they are proteins. So again, what you'll notice, and what I always say, we have things that are small, like oxygen. We have things that are large, like glucose, that have to go to the protein, through the protein. And then we have things that are really, really huge, like that enzyme that's being expelled from the cell. So the enzyme is something that is really, really large, so it cannot squeeze through the phospholipids. What you'll notice is that the phospholipids are creating kind of a circle around it. It's creating a little vesicle to help those things get outside of the cell. So now, how are these things moving either in or out of the cell? How do they know how to move? So we've talked about before, diffusion moves things from high to low concentration. And I always like to look here at this PowerPoint. And what I also do too, I also go to, here's that PowerPoint. But I like to look at this section of it. And at this time, what I'll tend to do, and I'm just looking at the model at the bottom, but at this time, what I tend to do, I always tell a little story, and I pull up on YouTube, Be a Bee by Little John. So at the beginning of that, you kind of have people kind of jumping around, and they're really, really crowded. They're in this area where they're really, really crowded. And I always say, like when I was in college, they had the parties, the people that were from down south, anytime this music came on, they would get like in this one huddle and they'll start jumping around. Well, to me, this is kind of like the little huddle that they get in right here. And they're all crowded in this little huddle, and you got to think, if they start jumping around, then they're going to bump into each other. And if they start bumping into each other, then they're going to start to spread apart. And what you'll notice is that as they start to spread apart, we still have some individuals that are still really close. So they're going to continuously still bump each other and spread apart even more. So that's the goal of diffusion, is to start in an area where it's crowded and move to an area where it is less crowded. And I like to think about it too. If you're on that dance floor, it's really high. After a while, you don't want to be around a whole lot of people because it's going to be too hot, and you want to find somewhere to cool off. So you'll go to an area to cool off where it's not a lot of people. So diffusion, it moves things from where they are crowded to where they are less crowded. So if we go back to our PBS, cell membrane just passing through model, evidently the oxygen was crowded outside of the cell and moved inside of the cell where it was less crowded. The carbon dioxide, it had to be crowded inside of the cell because it moved outside of the cell where it was less crowded. Now, instead of saying crowded to less crowded, I like to use the terms highly concentration, in an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, or a highly concentrated area to an area of low concentration. So just to look back at it, crowded means high, less crowded means low. So oxygen here, high to low inside. Carbon dioxide starts high, goes low to the outside. Glucose, high on the outside, moves to low on the inside. Now, what do you think about potassium? So, yes, it's high on the outside and it moves low to the inside of the cell. So I always go over that with my students, why it's going from high to low, and then we just make predictions using this model. Sodium, again, works with potassium in that sodium-potassium pump. So I just kind of mention it because we don't really get detailed in that process in honors bio. We mention it in AP bio, but not real detailed in honors bio. So after that, then we move on to passive and active transport. We go really take our notes, and then we move to passive and active transport. So passive transport, things can go across the cell's membrane without using energy because they go from high to low. Active transport, they have to use energy to get across the cell's membrane. So what I want you to notice is that if you look at these proteins, so the first one I'm going to play is the glucose, or select is the glucose, and then compare that to the potassium. So as you're comparing it, not necessarily looking at the color, but look at how it is behaving. Okay, so what you should notice is that the glucose is actually moving, and the potassium is not moving. So anytime you have any type of movement, or you move like you're stretching out your arms, you are using energy for that. So if the cell, the protein inside of the cell's membrane is moving, it's using energy. Potassium, you'll notice this says that this is a channel. A channel is just like an opening there. Kind of think about it like the door in your house. It's just an opening there, and you can cross through. The door, or not the door, but the opening to the door is not doing anything extra to help you get through. You're just able to pass through because it's there and it's open. Same thing with the potassium channel. It's just able to pass through. That protein is not moving, so it's not using any extra energy to help that potassium pass through. Sodium, it's moving, so again, it needs energy to help those substances move in or out of the cell. Now, since it's using energy, that is active transport. Water, and of course this is always osmosis. The cell isn't doing anything extra, so that it would be a type of passive transport. Now this enzyme, the cell membrane, those phospholipids, they do have to move to surround those particles. So since they are moving, this is another reason why the cell would use energy, or this would be active transport. So that's pretty much how I go through this with my students.